Amara lived what many called the perfect life in Lusaka. Her husband, Kato, was a successful businessman with money, charm, and influence. They lived in a big house, drove luxury cars, and traveled whenever they pleased. Friends often told her she was lucky, and she believed them. She wore her happiness like a crown, smiling at parties and holding Kato's hand as if nothing in the world could shake them. But one warm night, while they lay in bed, Kato's phone rang. It was almost midnight. He quickly grabbed it, glanced at her, and stepped out of the room. The tone of his voice was low and urgent, but not the way he spoke to work partners. Amara lay still, staring at the ceiling, her mind trying to dismiss the unease creeping in. Maybe it was just business. Maybe it was nothing. But something about the way he didn't look her in the eyes when he came back made her heart tighten. She smiled at him as if nothing had happened, but inside, a question had begun to grow. Who was on the other end of that call? She didn't know it then, but that single ring in the middle of the night would be the first crack in the image she had built of her perfect marriage. From that moment, every glance, every excuse, every late night would feel different. And though she didn't want to believe it, a small voice inside her whispered that her world was about to change forever. One quiet afternoon, Amara was sitting in the living room scrolling through her phone while Kato's phone buzzed on the table beside her. He was in the shower, so she thought nothing of it at first. But when the screen lit up again, she caught sight of a bank notification. She wasn't the type to go through her husband's things, but the words on the screen froze her in place. It was a payment, an amount big enough to cover rent in one of Lusaka's best neighborhoods. And under it, the memo read, "For rent," followed by a small red heart emoji. Her mind stilled for a moment as if it couldn't process what she was seeing. Who was this woman? And why was her husband paying her rent, with a heart at the end? Her pulse quickened, and she felt her palms grow damp. Every second felt stretched and heavy. She knew she had only a short window before he came back. Without thinking too much, she picked up his phone, quickly opened the message, and took a screenshot. Her fingers trembled as she sent it to her own phone, making sure there was proof in case this moment tried to feel like a bad dream later. Then she carefully placed the phone back exactly where it had been, her face calm, her body still. When Kato came out of the shower, she smiled at him as if nothing had happened. She asked him about dinner, about his day, acting as though she hadn't just seen something that could shatter her marriage. But inside, her heart was pounding against her ribs, the sound filling her head. She kept replaying the words "for rent, red heart." It didn't feel like the kind of rent you pay for a struggling cousin or an old family friend. This was different. It was secret. It was intimate. She wanted to confront him right then, demand answers, but something inside her told her to wait. To be sure. To know the whole truth before she made her move. So she laughed at his jokes, poured him a drink, and even leaned her head on his shoulder while they watched TV that night. But behind her smile, her mind was racing. She was already planning. She didn't know yet who the woman was, where she lived, or how long this had been going on. But she knew one thing: this was not going to be ignored. That single notification had opened a door she couldn't close, and behind it was a secret her husband had been hiding in plain sight. The more she thought about it, the more she felt her chest burn, not just with anger, but with something sharper. She wasn't just going to find out the truth. She was going to do something about it. And when she finally did, Kato would never see it coming. Saturday mornings were usually slow and easy for Amara and Kato. They would have breakfast together, talk about weekend plans, maybe go out for a drive. But that Saturday, Kato told her he had a quick meeting in town. His tone was casual, but to Amara, it felt rehearsed. She smiled and nodded, pretending not to care, but the moment he left the room, her heartbeat picked up. She had been waiting for the right moment to follow him, and this was it. She grabbed her keys, slipped on sunglasses, and waited a few minutes before driving out, keeping her distance. The streets of Lusaka were busy as usual, but her eyes never left his car. Every turn he took, she stayed far enough not to be noticed, her palms gripping the steering wheel tightly. She expected him to head toward his office, but instead, he turned into the quiet, leafy neighborhood of Woodlands. It was one of the city's most expensive areas, known for its gated apartments and high security. She slowed down as his car rolled into the parking lot of a sleek, modern apartment complex. She parked on the opposite side of the street, her heart pounding in her ears. A few moments later, Cato stepped out of his car, smoothing his shirt. Then a young woman appeared from the entrance. She was beautiful, tall, stylish, with perfect makeup, and she smiled like she had been waiting for him all morning. Amara's breath caught in her throat as she saw the woman walk straight up to Cato and kiss him on the lips. Not a friendly peck, but a kiss filled with warmth and familiarity. The scene blurred in front of her eyes, her stomach tightening like she'd been punched. She gripped the steering wheel so hard her fingers ached. Every part of her wanted to storm across the street, demand answers, scream at both of them. But she didn't move. She forced herself to stay still, to breathe, to think. Confronting him now would give him time to lie, to twist the story. No, she needed more than just the truth, she needed control. She watched them disappear inside together, then glanced at the building, memorizing every detail. The name on the gate, the security guard's uniform, even the layout of the balconies. This wasn't just some random place, it was a luxury property, the kind you couldn't rent without serious money. She sat in her car for a few more minutes, her mind racing. Now she had a face to go with the payment on Cato's phone. Now she knew this wasn't just suspicion, it was real. But instead of breaking down, she felt a strange calm spread through her. She wasn't going to cry in her car or beg for an explanation. She turned her engine back on and drove away slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line. This was no longer about catching him. It was about building something bigger, something he would never forget. And Amara knew that from this moment on, the game had just begun. Amara didn't waste time. The moment she got home from following Cato, she knew this wasn't something she could handle with guesswork. She needed facts, names, and details, something no amount of smooth talking from Cato could erase. She called a lawyer she trusted, a man who had helped her family with property matters before. Her voice was calm, but inside she was shaking. She told him she needed a private investigator, someone discreet, someone who could find the truth without Cato ever knowing. 2 days later, she met the investigator in a small cafe far from her neighborhood. He was a quiet, observant man who didn't ask unnecessary questions. She gave him the few clues she had, the bank transaction with the heart emoji, the name of the apartment complex, and the day she saw Cato there. He simply nodded, promised to look into it, and left. The waiting was the hardest part. Every time Cato smiled at her or asked about dinner plans, she felt a mix of anger and control. She didn't let her emotions show, but inside, she counted the hours until the investigator called. When he finally did, his voice was steady, as if he was reading from a report. The woman's name was Nandi. She was the owner of a small boutique in town, selling expensive dresses and handbags. The kind of boutique that didn't seem busy enough to survive without extra income. Cato had been supporting her for over a year, paying her rent in full every single month. The investigator also discovered something more interesting: the apartment wasn't just any apartment. It was a luxury unit in a building owned by an elderly businessman. The man had no children, no wife, and had been quietly telling people he was ready to retire and sell the building if the right buyer came along. Amara listened without interrupting, her mind already weaving the pieces together. The affair was painful, but the opportunity hidden inside it was too sharp to ignore. She didn't just have proof of Cato's betrayal. She had a chance to turn his secret into her power. She thanked the investigator, promised him his payment, and sat in her car for a long moment after the call. She could almost see the path ahead of her now. This wasn't going to be about shouting or throwing things or leaving with just her dignity. This was going to be about turning the game upside down, about making Cato realize he had been building her power without even knowing it. That night, she cooked dinner as usual. Cato walked in, kissed her cheek, and told her about his busy day. She smiled, nodding in all the right places, while her mind played a different story altogether. She now knew Nandi's name, her business, her address, and she knew who owned the walls around her. And Amara had already decided, she wasn't just going to expose the truth. She was going to own it. Literally. Amara knew exactly what she had to do next. The information from the investigator wasn't just proof of betrayal, it was an opening. That old businessman who owned Nandi's building was ready to retire, and she had the money to make it happen. She didn't need Cato's help or his approval. Her parents had left her a generous inheritance, money she had never touched because she wanted to keep something of her own. Now, she knew this was the moment to use it. She arranged a meeting with the building's owner at a quiet hotel restaurant in the outskirts of Lusaka. He was an older man with kind eyes and a polite smile, the type who preferred conversations over tea rather than boardrooms. She told him she was interested in buying the property. He was surprised. It wasn't often that someone approached him directly, but her confidence kept him listening. She didn't mention Nandi. She didn't mention Cato. This was simply an investment opportunity, she explained. They went back and forth over the details. The building was valuable, with multiple tenants and a prime location in Woodlands. But Amara knew she could afford it. Every word she spoke was calm and measured, even though her heart was racing with the thought of what this deal really meant. She promised a smooth sale, fast payment, and no unnecessary delays. He liked that. Within 2 weeks, the papers were ready. Amara transferred the funds from her own account, money that had nothing to do with her husband, and signed the final documents. As she held the thick folder with the official seal, a quiet satisfaction spread through her. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was in control. But the best part? She hadn't just bought Nandi's apartment. She had bought the entire building. Every tenant, every room, every brick, it all now belonged to her. Nandi's luxury unit was just one part of her new property empire. And Cato had no idea that the woman he was secretly supporting was now living under his wife's ownership. She drove past the building that evening, parking far enough away so no one would notice her. Lights glowed from the windows, and she imagined the people inside going about their lives, completely unaware that their landlord had just changed. She could almost picture Nandi inside her apartment, maybe talking to Cato on the phone, completely unaware that the woman she was competing with for his attention now literally held the keys to her home. Amara didn't feel rage anymore. She felt a cool, sharp kind of power, the kind that came from patience and planning. She didn't need to shout or confront him, not yet. The game wasn't over. She had the upper hand, and the moment Cato and Nandi found out who really owned that apartment would be the moment everything changed. For now, she let him keep his secret, unaware that it was no longer his. It was hers. And she intended to use it. When the first rent day under her new ownership arrived, Amara made sure the news reached Nandi in the most direct way possible. No phone calls, no emails, just a simple printed letter hand-delivered to her door. It was short and impossible to misunderstand. Your new landlord is Amara Cato. All further payments are due directly to me. She imagined Nandi reading it, her eyes widening, the shock hitting her like a cold splash of water. Amara didn't need to be there to see it. She could feel it. That evening, Cato came home later than usual. The sound of his car door slamming was sharper than normal. He stormed into the house, his face dark with fury, and tossed his keys onto the counter. "What have you done?" he demanded, his voice tight. Amara didn't answer right away. She stayed seated at the dining table, sipping her tea as if he'd just asked about the weather. That calmness only seemed to make him angrier. "You bought the building. You sent her that letter. Are you insane?" He barked, pacing the room. Amara didn't flinch. She reached into her bag, pulled out a thick envelope, and slid it across the table toward him. "Open it," she said softly. He hesitated, then pulled out the crisp papers inside. His eyes scanned the first page, and she saw the exact moment the truth hit him. It was the official property deed, stamped and signed, naming Amara as the sole owner of the entire building. "You've been paying her rent," she said, her voice low and steady. "Now you'll be paying me." For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Cato's mouth opened, then closed again. His usual charm, the quick lies he always had ready, were gone. He looked like a man who had just realized the ground beneath him wasn't as solid as he thought. "I don't know what you think you're doing," he muttered, but it sounded weak, even to him. Amara leaned back in her chair, still holding her tea. "I'm simply managing my property," she said with a small smile. "You've been very generous to her for over a year. I thought it was only fair you continue, just through me this time." The way she said it, calm, polite, almost businesslike, made it clear this wasn't about a jealous wife catching her husband. This was about power, control, and the fact that she had taken his secret and turned it into something he could never undo. Cato's anger didn't disappear, but it shifted into something else, confusion, maybe even fear. He realized there was no shouting, no apology, no excuse that could change what had just happened. Amara stood, collected the empty teacup, and walked toward the kitchen without another word. Behind her, Cato stayed frozen at the table, staring at the deed in his hands. He had walked into this house thinking he could control the situation. But tonight, for the first time, he understood, he wasn't the one in control anymore. The charity gala was one of the biggest events of the year, filled with Lusaka's most powerful families, business owners, and politicians. The chandeliers glowed, the cameras flashed, and everyone was dressed to impress. Amara arrived in a fitted emerald gown, her head high, her expression calm. Cato was by her side, greeting people with his usual charm, completely unaware of the storm she was about to unleash. When it was her turn to speak, supposedly to thank donors for their generosity, Amara walked to the microphone, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She began warmly, praising the community and talking about investment in the city. Then her tone shifted. She announced that she had recently become the proud owner of a luxury apartment building in Woodlands. The crowd clapped politely, not yet sensing the twist. "And," she said, her voice ringing clear, "one of those tenants is a beautiful boutique owner, whose rent has been kindly paid for over a year. By my loving husband, Cato." Gasps rippled through the room. All eyes turned to Cato, whose smile had frozen mid-expression. The cameras caught everything, his shock, the stiffness in his jaw, the whispers spreading like wildfire around them. Amara didn't stay to watch him fumble for an excuse. She simply thanked everyone for their support, stepped down from the stage, and walked straight out of the room. Heads turned as she passed, some in awe, others in disbelief. That night, she didn't leave as a betrayed wife. She left as a woman who had taken her pain and turned it into power, one of the most talked about, and now most influential, property owners in the city. And Cato? He was left standing in the middle of the glittering hall, exposed under the brightest lights of his life.